What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Rams Brothers. I'm your host, Dean, and I'm joined, as always, by my brother and the other great host of this show, Nick. And for this episode specifically, we have a third Rams brother. It looks like he's joined us in his Victory Monday jacket. Kevin Demoff, the president of the Los Angeles Rams, is here on Rams Brothers today. Kevin, before we jump into anything, first and most importantly, you look incredible. But second,
thank you.
How are you?
I'm great. It's getting ready for preseason. Excited to go see what this team has a little bit and take it from, training camp. It was great to get a chance to scrimmage the Cowboys this week and see just a different opponent than yourself. And it's always fun. Look, anytime you get to go to SoFi Stadium and play a game, always gets me and the group excited. So ready for this weekend.
Good to hear. How do you feel about the state of the Los Angeles Rams? This is going to be from a high level question, right? Because you've been through this before. This is year 16 of you being the president of the Los Angeles Rams. So the product on field, the way the brand and the organization currently represents themselves off the field, all the work you've done to bring it all to life. How do you feel about the state of this team, this organization as of today?
Look, I think I said this when we did the media at the spring meetings for the NFL. I think this organization is as strong as it's ever been, top to bottom. I look back, it's hard to believe this is our 10th season in Los Angeles. And, when we came back to LA, the goal was make sure 10 years from now, when people write the story in 2026, did the NFL get it right by bringing the Rams back to Los Angeles? That answer is a resounding yes. And I feel as we head into that 10th year, I feel pretty good about where we sit, overall, the success of SoFi Stadium, the product on the field, the growth off the field, the international growth. When you just look at this organization from players, coaches, staff, I feel like we're in a really good place. There's always room to grow. There's always room to improve. And I think the one thing about this organization, we always have such an appetite to conquer more, to do more, to try new things, and that will never change. But, overall, when I think the nature of the relationship between the team, the fans, the stadium, the league, I'm truly excited about what this season will bring. And I just think there's a great sense of, continuity, but growth at the same time.
And I think that's what makes it so much fun to be a fan of this organization right now. So from almost hosting the NFC Championship game last year, to signing Poona, to signing Davante Adams, to, the preseason being here as of tomorrow and Maui camp and some of the great things he did in the offseason, knowing what you know and looking at the roster from top to bottom, how far specifically do you think this year's team can go?
Look, I think this team's year can compete certainly with the best teams. That's the way you want to go into the season. And I think this team's different. I think back to the really, the Super Bowl years in 2018 and 2021, we were probably Super Bowl favorites kind of walking into the year, or certainly among the 2 or 3 teams, and I would say those are some of the least fun years because you have such high expectations and you have to live up to them. And then I look at years like 2017, 2023, where you kind of come out of nowhere and you have that. And those are the most fun years. Look, I think this year's team has certainly you don't pick up where you left off last year, right? I think Sean and Les talk about it all the time. We don't end this season 13 yards away. You go make those 2 plays in the NFC Championship. We've got to go, prove it over the course of time, stay healthy, get better. But, when you look at this team, I think what strikes me most about this team is how connected they are as a group, as a unit, the love they have for each other, the way they play for each other. That'll be what powers you through an entire season. If they carry that bond through, we have a chance to do great things. Obviously, we're the defending NFC West champions. I think everybody in the division got better. And it starts with, you don't get to do anything in this league before you win your own division, right? That's the only guaranteed ticket to the playoffs. So first and foremost, can we get better so that, we beat the Niners, the Seahawks, and the Cardinals? That's going to be the first goal. Where it goes beyond that, is great. Do I have dreams of this team going deep? Sure. But we've also known, hey, the last 2 years we've started off slow. We've got to figure out a way to solve that. I think this team is poised for potentially great things, but you got to go earn it from day one. And I think this team, I don't want to say it has a target on its back. I don't know that we're at that stage. But certainly after the last 2 years of being in the playoffs and this young crew, nobody is overlooking us, and you're going to get everybody's best.
Yeah, I feel like that one guy on Pat McAfee that just looks like an Easter Island head and doesn't talk. So I feel like I had to add something in here. But I'm going to be there week 1, so you definitely show up. I feel like all Rams fans feel like it does sometimes take a little bit to get things off the ground. But I have a question specifically for you. Since the relocation, you've really been the center of some pivotal decisions for the franchise, the Pied Piper, if you will. That first year under Jeff Fisher was an important bridge. But then you made the bold move to hire Sean McVay, and it's kind of hard to argue with those results. During that critical period, what did you see in the interview process that gave you the confidence to make that hire?
Oh, look, I think what we saw in the interview process, and it wasn't just myself, right? It was Les Snead, it was Tony Pastors, Stan Kroenke, Josh Kroenke. Ultimately, what you saw is what's happened, right? Like you saw, this amazing leader with an, unique ability to communicate a vision. And we've moved past the world where everybody's looking for the next Sean McVay. I think that, certainly there have been 6, 7 hires that have come out of that. But I always used to tell people in 2017, 2018, like what makes the next Sean McVay is not the play calling, the offensive mind, even the defensive mind. It's his ability to reach players, communicate, and get the best out of them and inspire them, right? And even we had a social media thing, during training camp where we asked the players, what would Sean be if he was not a head coach? And aside from, Matthew Stafford, who said he'd be a McDonald's drive-through worker, a number of the players said he'd be a motivational speaker. And I think that speaks to him. And you just saw, and I think what we saw with Sean was, hey, this guy is going to be a terrific head coach in the NFL. He might be 30. It might not be next year, but you don't want to miss that. You knew it. And you're like, someone is going to pull this trigger. Why not us? And I don't think any of us necessarily expected to go 11-5 and have the NFL's best offense in 2017. And I think even if you talk to people in our organization, we look back and lament, that was a year we probably had a chance to go deeper than we did. We were just so young. We didn't know, but that team was a good team and we blew people out. Just like when you got into the lights in the Coliseum in 2017 against the Falcons, who had just been to the Super Bowl, right? Like it was a different feeling, but
for sure,
but I think the amazing thing with Sean is you watch, he was great at the start, but he has grown every year as a head coach, as a leader, as a communicator. The number of people this camp who have said this is the best headspace he's been in as a leader, the way he's interacting with the team, like that's what gives you such confidence. We're fortunate, we've had him at the helm all of that way, but it was truly, I always look back at, this organization where we sit today. It's because Stan Kroenke took the 2 biggest chances in the NFL in decades, right? He picked up and said, I'm going to try to take this team to Los Angeles. And, when we were already in St. Louis. And the second was, I'm going to go bet on a 30-year-old head coach, which, I think JB Long's still the one who pulls out the quotes every January 12th from the press conference of people calling us, morons. And some did and some knew Sean. But, people look back now and, think it was a given. But I think, there was definitely, we didn't see any risk because we knew kind of what we had, but certainly it was unorthodox. But I think unorthodox has come to probably describe everything we've done, in the decades since. And I think that was a great way to start it.
Do you feel like that was the one of the best decisions that you've ever made in your entire life, right? Because you pair somebody like a Sean McVay, right? Who's 37, 38 years old. Stafford's within the same range, right? In terms of age range, their experience as they work together, being able to identify that talent, being at the resort that he was at to be as aggressive as he was to pursue Matthew Stafford and be able to make that acquisition. I'm just curious, like, is the combination of Stafford and McVay one of the better decisions that you've ever made? And if so, how do you continue to kind of see it grow over the next year or so?
I don't view it as my decision, right? Like we were part of a group that made the decision, and ultimately I view it as Stan, Josh, Les, Tony, me, all being on the same page, right? And then, Les has a saying, which I think we all agree with, which is you have to work to make your decisions work, right? And so, how do you go build an organization that really comes together and ultimately culminated in that trade, and having the guts to go, do something, pretty significant, pretty early to rip up a contract you had just given to a quarterback who you believed in, to go really take a swing at winning the Super Bowl. All of those decisions I think have worked out, which make it easy. And in hindsight, I think probably people, because they've worked out, people forget the risk that they were. But would I count that among our better decisions? Sure, but we could also spend a long time on the really crappy decisions. So I'll smile at that one and say we probably got that one right.
Yeah, I think I would agree. And at some point, just pivoting over to the quarterback position, like there's life after Matthew Stafford, right? It's something that you have to kind of take into consideration. The injection that he got into his back was an epidural, right? So that's a shot directly into your spine. Like, is there a major concern within the building about Matthew Stafford's future this year, next year, in terms of his health? It seems like he's something that he's been through before, but eventually you kind of have to start considering life after Matthew Stafford. And similar to the way that you did it with Jared Goff, there's 2 first-round picks waiting for next year in 2026. So just curious of what your headspace is at in terms of his future and, what the injury looks like right now amongst the people in the building.
Well, look, I think, even when you did the trade, you started considering life after Matthew Stafford. One of the reasons he was available is he was 33, 34. The Lions were looking at a long-term horizon. We were probably looking at a shorter-term horizon. And then you win the Super Bowl and you're like, okay, I wonder how many more years does Matthew want to do this? I think the thing about Matthew is he loves playing football. He loves being around his teammates. He loves leading. He's an amazing competitor, a terrific human being. So I think, every year he probably by the end feels his body a little bit. But I would say, aside from 2022, he's ended 2023 and 2024 feeling very healthy. And each year walks in kind of rejuvenated, which is exactly where he was this year. Look, I think, as Sean has said at the press conferences, is there a level of concern, when your 37-year-old quarterback has any kind of issue in the preseason? Of course, there's a small level of concern. That level, I think, with Matthew Stafford is decreased because he's one of the toughest players I've ever seen be around. His love for the game. We still have a month until we play a game, right? I think if we were talking, this was Labor Day, we might be in a different position. And I think, as Sean said this week, if we had a game this week, Matthew Stafford would be playing. And I think one of the things you can do is when you have a quarterback who's been through it all, we haven't changed the offense. He knows it inside out. Like, you can give him rest. The plan, whether he, had the back issue or not, was to really limit his reps during training camp, because why use any throws in July and August that you won in November and December, right? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And so that was always the plan. I think for us, to be able to give Jimmy those reps if we need him, to come in and play at any point during the year has been fantastic. It's been fantastic for Stetson to truly get reps as the backup quarterback, which he's never gotten. His progress through camp has been amazing. I look forward to seeing him in a game, and he's making throws right now that I don't think any of us have ever seen him make, and he's playing with confidence. So those have been silver linings. But, assuming everything with Matthew goes according to the plans that Reggie Scott and Dr. Watkins and everybody's laid out, I don't have any concern. Now, look, every game I watch Matthew and I have concern, right? When you have, an all-pro quarterback who is one of the heartbeats of your team, every time he drops back, you're concerned, right? Like, that's just the nature of what we do in this league. If you have Matthew Stafford, you can dream big. Now, with Jimmy Garoppolo, I think we could still dream big, but obviously, for us, it's that balancing act of, how do we get the best out of Matthew Stafford weeks 1 through 17, and how do we prepare so that if he can't go for a game for whatever reason, that there's no drop off to Jimmy. And look, we were fortunate enough last year to get to see Jimmy play week 17 against Seattle, and I understand, people can say, "Oh, this game we had the most yards all season that we had," and and you saw a little bit of different offense, kind of than maybe we do with Matthew. But I think there's great confidence. And I saw somewhere online this week, people ask Sean about Matthew, and he talks about Jimmy, and it's like, oh, it's a deflection. It's, they're talking it up. Like, feels great when you have, look, a lot of times, whether it was Jared or even earlier with Matthew, we didn't invest in the backup quarterback position. Can you kind of just figured, hey, if that goes wrong, we're probably shot. Obviously, as Matthew's gotten to 36, 37, you have someone of Jimmy's ability to come in. You feel really good about having one of the best backups in the league. It's a position we've left money and cap space in to invest in, and you feel really good about the room. But do we want Matthew Stafford to play every game? Absolutely. Do I lose any sleep if Jimmy Garoppolo has to come in at some point? I really don't. And I think that's been one of the great things about training camp. But all that to be said, I think we'll be excited to see Matthew take the field the next couple of weeks and ramp up, and give him 1-2 weeks, and we'll be ready for the Texans.
I think a lot of Rams fans thought when that Jimmy signing took place a while ago, it was like, all right, great. This guy's off San Francisco, which is just beautiful in its own right, because I felt like he was always dicing us up there. But moving on to my favorite topic, which is uniforms, another hot topic. A lot of love for the current designs, especially the white modern throwbacks. The dark rivalries are coming out, which we don't really know about. Has been a lot of voices that have voiced their frustration at times when the rebrand happened, me included. But those bone jerseys, I think those particularly, ones right behind me, the best in football. Were there any other concepts that were explored that just never made it to the light of day?
Yeah, I think we've looked at a lot of different concepts, right? And, the goal when we did it in 2020, and, one of the first lessons learned, don't do a rebrand in the middle of COVID and a worldwide shutdown, right? Like when everybody's sitting at their computers and nitpicking, and, that was something that was beyond our control. And I know that, when you look at our fans, it breaks into two segments of kind of the newer fans and then the older fans who love the original jerseys. And throwbacks are hot, and I respect that. I understand that. Our goal when we moved into SoFi Stadium was always new brand, new image, moving the Rams forward. We started off, hey, we're going to go do these jerseys, blue, bone, eventually brought out white, and then it was always we're going to add a couple more. But one of the things that we ultimately got to, and especially as we've made changes throughout the organization, was like, we're only going to release a jersey if we feel really good about it. I think we got to a couple of different points where we considered different uniforms that, hey, do we like them? Do we love them? Was there a need to go do it? Do we really want to anchor ourselves in blue and white, really in particular, and then sprinkle in bone? So that has been an evolution. I think we have certainly thought about how do you incorporate our history moving forward into other uniforms. Then you got into now you can do separate helmets. That was a change, certainly, as we started to look. And then we've known, really for 2 years that the rivalries jerseys were coming. So that kind of took us out of the mix for doing something in 2025 different, because there was not only the effort to go do rivalries, but to make sure that launch was successful. So excited to see, and I think one of the things that's interesting about rivalry, right? And, is it's been teased by Nike and the NFL and us. The past month, you get, well, where's the yellow? Where's the white and blue throwback? Where's the blue? Like, these are not throwback opportunities, right? Like, when you look at rivalries, it is much more along the City Connect, MLB jerseys, City Edition, basketball jerseys. I don't know that they're exactly in that form. Look, this is a jersey that is meant to be very different than anything that's been in your closet or is in your closet and is worn once a year, right? So even if you said it's the greatest thing, the worst thing, you wear it once a year against a division opponent. I do think, I see all the feedback about the uniforms. I usually don't respond to it because it's a never-ending battle. And by the way, you can't make instantaneous changes, right? If someone says, I don't like, okay, like you've already gone through years of design, working through it. And so you can't pivot even, as we look ahead to 26, and there's a chance we will do, we may add jerseys to the closet in 26 or a jersey. But those are years in the making. But I'm excited for the rivalry. We haven't had a new jersey really debut since 2021. I think it's something, fans like. I know our players had a ton of input into rivalry. And I think that was one of the things that was truly exciting about this journey is getting players' input, what they've wanted, what they like, in a way that maybe we haven't necessarily had before, just because we have, had this now core group of younger players for a while. But we hear it all, understand it. And look, I think balancing, one of the hardest things to do in sports, whether you're talking about uniforms or not, is balancing tradition versus innovation. And, coming back, that's something, we've always done. And, I hear all the time, the Rams had one of the best uniforms, great organizations don't change uniform, steel, or, when you talk about legacy franchises, it's true, but we've also moved a bunch. And I think that's a different element to me of when you come back, you're looking at a different, part of it is harkening back to the past, and part of it is how do we move forward. And but the voices are not quiet on uniforms. I always appreciate the passion. I would say, like, I'd rather passion than apathy. But, I don't think, I laugh when I worked at the Buccaneers, creamsicle was a 4-letter word. right? Like you couldn't even mention it. And now, they're back to doing it. The Eagles, the Seahawks, the same. I think what's retro is now in.
Yeah.
Which I think, and maybe that's always the case, in terms of fashion, but, certainly we understand that. But I think one of the differences for us is our current uniforms do really harken back to those 80s jerseys in a different way. So I think if we were looking at a throwback concept, it'd be unlikely we'd say, oh, let's go do an 80s jersey and just do that and keep our current ones. Probably not what we would do.
Yeah, I mean, the most important things about these jerseys is you won in them. So, I mean, I think that LA logo, everything now currently is like solidified. And before I pass it off to Dean here, if I just put a bug in your ear, the colors that you and I are wearing, these St. Louis Rams colors with the current horn, I think would just be lights out. That's just my personal opinion. And then we could just shut up about the uniforms.
I've owned this blazer really since we moved, and when we win games on Monday, I wear it in the office, so it sits on the back of my chair, which is why it was here. I don't know that these colors look good on any blazer, or this is really, exemplary fashion. Look, I've always thought, one of the things difference in the color schemes, right? Like the current colors really were designed to pop under the SoFi lights, which I think they do.
Yeah.
And look, and I think that's one of the reasons I do think the white jerseys are very sharp. I like all our jerseys, but I also think people have nostalgia for them because we won the Super Bowl in them, right? Like any jersey you win a Super Bowl in, you're gonna, look good. And I think that is what we said in 2020, which was people love jerseys because of the memories they create. It's not really design aesthetic. It's what they emote in all of us from our childhood, from our youth, from the memories that we've had watching them. And people love the familiar and the memories. And that's where, change is both, good and bad. And, but I don't know that you're going to see those colors coming back anytime soon. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I like the bright stuff. I like the new logo, the new color scheme, everything that you guys have done since SoFi Stadium has been open. Just to see that new uniform shine on TV, it pops. In person, it pops. It differentiates ourselves, but also pays homage to the past. So that's what I enjoy the most about it. But in terms of how you're continuing to evolve the brand and your market presence as of right now, because obviously you're operating in one of the largest and most competitive sports markets in the entire world, right? So in terms of popularity, in terms of geography, what else are you kind of currently doing or will be doing to grow the Rams brand and starting to, I guess, continue to deepen the connection that you have with the community as of right now?
Yeah. Look, so much of what we've done really over the last decade has been trying to rekindle that relationship with those who loved us before. And, even when we scrimmaged in Oxnard this past week, it reminded me, it's been a decade since we did that first scrimmage against the Cowboys in 2015, where our fans showed up en masse with Stan Kroenke heads and Bring Back the Los Angeles Rams and that whole crew. And I don't know that we're in Los Angeles without that fan support that really was so vocal, throughout that process. So it's, continuing those relationships, but it's really been investing in youth for those who are growing up with an NFL team for the first time. And, it's hard when, Los Angeles is such a big market. It's a transplant market. People move here from all over, and, people don't give up their football teams, right? Like they play once a week. They love them. They go to the Steelers have a bar, the Eagles have a bar, every team has a bar in LA, and that was always the case. And, and the first thing is you got to put a product on the field and a brand that people feel compelled to watch. Then you've got to convince them, okay, come spend 6 hours on a Sunday at the Coliseum, at SoFi Stadium, when you used to spend that time at a bar or in your house. But really the investment's been that next generation of kids who will grow up always knowing the Rams. And what I love when I see kids wearing, at training camp, a Jared Verse jersey, a Puka Nacua, Davante, these kids have grown up only knowing the Rams. And that's your, future legion of fans. It's really going to give you, that love in the market. But Los Angeles is it's a great sports market. It's crazy, but when you think about, you have the best player in the world plays for the Dodgers, right? And Shohei Ohtani, and one of the greatest players in the world, certainly LeBron James, Luka Doncic, LAFC goes out and brings in probably one of the most popular MLS players in Son, South Korea. And I keep telling our group, how do we find the next Asian NFL star? Who's our Ohtani? Who's our Son? And sure. It's tongue in cheek, but as we go invest internationally, I think that's the hardest part about the NFL is such a global market, such an international market. You would love to have more international stardom, that you could bring in, because I think that does supercharge your fan base in a unique way, here in Los Angeles. But I think whether it's training camp, whether it's investing in grassroots youth football, flag football, whether it's things like Maui, which go, build a fan base in a state that's 1.5 million people that's football mad, whether it's playing a game in Australia next year, the international efforts in Mexico and the Pacific Rim, trying to grow an international brand. But it's also just continuing to innovate the fan experience at SoFi Stadium. Make sure that if anybody comes to SoFi, it's the best experience they can have in the NFL. It's making our players more accessible. I love, one of the things that brings joy to me at training camp this year, watching our fans go crazy for Puka Nacua and Jared Verse. Like, I think one of the really exciting things about this team, really with the exception of Matthew, Davante, it is a homegrown team. That is such a shift from kind of where we were in the Super Bowl era when we had all these great players who I love. But that really, this is a group that's been drafted by the Rams, embraced by the Rams. I think our fans know them and love them. And Cooper Kupp was that. And, we've loved, and Todd Gurley had some of that. But when you look at, to me, Puka and Jared and Kobe and Steve Avila, Quentin Lake, like this next group of players, Braden Fitz, they have that. I think that's what's so exciting about what we can do with this brand, and, watching them continue to grow. And, Puka and Jared have such great personalities. They all do. But I mean, those two, those can be the lights of your franchise for a very long time. I put Kyron Williams, in that bucket, as well. And it was great to get a deal done with him. And I think I can't remember a player who we've been as excited to sign for what they do on the field as to really what they bring to our entire organization as Kyron and all that he represents, in positive ways. So I think in growing the brand, look, you continue to win football games. You continue to play an exciting brand of football. You continue to invest in the community in SoFi Stadium. I truly think our project in Woodland Hills, from a practice facility standpoint, which will give us, not the 10 days a year we're playing at SoFi, but the other 355, a true home in the Valley, which has been underinvested in, from a sports perspective in Los Angeles, is another amazing, opportunity. So all of those come into play, but, it starts with getting the right players, people believing in them, people loving their character, who engage, making sure that, the entire organization believes in the direction we're headed, which is to be the most innovative, accessible team that plays an unbelievable brand of football. And, if we could find a way to kind of have a couple of deep playoff runs and, maybe another Super Bowl trophy won at SoFi Stadium in 2027 wouldn't hurt as well.
Yeah. So a couple of things, right? So you invest in the youth off the field, you invest in the youth, the homegrown talent, which then brings and attracts people to the stadium, to training camp, to all these types of events. And you also have this international approach. So it feels like, Rams fans I like to kind of see like where their heads are at in terms of, this is one of the most profitable organizations in sports. Like, do you guys know kind of what you're watching? Do you understand the growth over the past 10 years? Do you understand that our leadership team is something that you could really live and die by and root for at this point? So, you kind of tease those things around. So when, a situation like a brand new uniform causes controversy, it's like, well, the product on the field is incredible, right? So the product on the field's good. Your head coach is somebody you could root for as a family man. Same with your quarterback. It just makes the entirety of the organization much easier to root for. So just to hear this from you to our fan base, I think is really incredible.
You forgot, we got Les Snead here. You mentioned everybody else, but we got the Les Snead bobblehead with the straw in his mouth. So, Les deserves his props as well. He's, but I do think, we've been fortunate, 9 years of truly stable leadership at head coach, at GM, with ownership, with Tony Pastores, who's done an amazing job kind of helping out on the football side, with Reggie Scott, with this group has been amazing. And look, stability allows you to do a lot of things. Continue to grow that relationship, to continue and invest. And I do think, fans, I hope that they go to bed at night knowing between Sean and Les, the organization is in great hands. And that doesn't mean every decision we make works. It doesn't mean every decision we make isn't without controversy. But look, fandom is fun. And if it were all perfect, fans would be spoiled, right? There are going to be good days and bad days. You're going to have games where you're thinking you're going to go to the Super Bowl, and games where you're thinking you're going to have the first overall pick, right? And I think, when you go through that, that's what I love about just fandom in general, right? You should never be satisfied. You should recognize that, hey, this has been a pretty good run, 6 playoffs, in 8 years, 4 division titles, 2 championships, and a Super Bowl title. But you should always want more, right? Like you should be spoiled and want this. And, I think we as an organization should hold ourselves to the standard that every year should be a Super Bowl year, and every jersey we relaunch should be perfect, and every branding campaign and every billboard is perfect, right? If you really want to be one of those elite franchises that I think we're capable of being, that's the standard you should aim for. And the feedback from fans is always helpful in, kind of helping recalibrate where we get it right and where we get it wrong.
Yeah. To say personally, as somebody who was a St. Louis Rams fan his whole life, I went to USC film school. I find out that the Rams are then following me to USC was one of the greatest moments of my life. They were literally playing in my backyard. So as somebody who was directly a part of that, I just wanted to say thank you, because that is, it's truly one of the greatest moments. It was like, all the planets aligned. It was like, oh man, the Rams are here. Finally, they're back.
It was either, Hollywood Park became available to purchase, or you go on SC. That was the impetus, for the move. So we'll let you figure out which one.
Yeah, I think you made the right call. And then, finally, just as you've been a key part as the Rams, guiding them through these 9 years back in LA, looking back, is there anything that you would have done differently along the way?
Oh, so many things, right? I think I look back at 2016 and, you start off, I remember the first thing USC telling us, hey, the Coliseum really can't handle more than 70,000 people. So what do? We jam 95,000 people in for the opener in 95-degree heat. And, we run out of water and the bathrooms don't work. And
we were there, by the way.
And you're like, and thank God we won the game, and credit to Alec Ogletree for, punching the ball out and, preserving a victory. But, 2016 had some amazing moments and some dark moments. And you look back on that, and you look back on, so many places where we could have been better, right? I think, if you took a, as Les Snead would say, a macro view, I think it's macro, but, we'll call it what it is. like the last 9 years have had plenty of success stories, but, along the way, we've made plenty of mistakes, and you learn best from your mistakes, right? I think that's ultimately, as an organization, when you look at places you got it right, you're like, oh, that's great. When you look at places you get it wrong, you really do take those to heart, try to fix them, learn from them, and get better. And our mistakes far outweigh our successes. Hopefully most of them happen behind the scenes where we're able to fix them, and recalibrate. And whether they're on the field or off the field, no organization is perfect, and no organization comes close to perfect. And when you actually embrace that, and you learn from failure, and you truly are resilient, I think, a lot of lessons from 2022, if we're ever fortunate enough to win another Super Bowl, we'll be so much better prepared to handle the year after than we were, in 2022. I don't think it's any shock. I look back, our 2, worst years came after we went to the Super Bowl, right? Like, how do you learn from that each time? And it was different in 2022 because we were fortunate enough to win it in some of those challenges, but what it means to go chase that. But then to me, the reset in 2023 was a learning from those failures. The mistakes we made in 22, I think, have paved the way for this group of Rams to really go forth and be successful. And when I look at, one of the things that has me most excited about this year is, I expect, we will be a good competitive team. Where that lands is where it lands. I also look, and I think right now we have amongst the most draft capital in next year's draft class. We have among the most cap space, of the teams in 2026, and really only a handful of starters who are free agents. Like, that to me is where, this team is a little bit different than maybe some of those where, we have the chance to be really competitive without all of our eggs in the proverbial 2025 basket. Now, obviously we have an older quarterback. That's a different, element, but you learn from, hey, how do you keep 2 feet in the present, but also with an eye towards the future? And I think, we've probably gotten much better at that as an organization, maybe, than we're at. And if this year doesn't necessarily go our way, there's no reason this group can't come right back in 2026, and be better. And I think that is all learnings from the past. But, we could do 2 hours on mistakes. I promise you. Probably buying this blazer was a mistake. So
That's all Rams fans could ask for, though, is that you guys are evaluating yourselves internally and you're trying to put one of the top 5 products on the field consistently year after year after year. And you guys have talent that you're bringing in that's homegrown, that's hungry, and you have aging veterans that fit into spots accordingly and bring everything to life in the way that the coach envisions and the way that Les envisions. So as fans, all we can really do is say thank you. And aside from that, it's the engagement that you guys have with your fan base that I think really kind of separates at least my fandom with other organizations across the board. It doesn't feel like there's a true fan to team engagement level that has been tapped into. And it with you jumping on this podcast and with all the interaction we've gotten on social media, it feels like that component is very much in place. So we're greatly appreciative of you and all the time that you've taken just to not only go back and forth with us on Twitter via DM, but to spend Friday afternoon with us on Rams Brothers. So it's greatly appreciated.
Look, you are only as strong as your fan base. And, the moment you forget that is the moment you kind of get lost. And I would say, you need to be responsive to what you hear. And I was fortunate enough to work with Marv Levy, who just turned 100. And earlier in my career, I was a writer at Fox Sports on their show. And Marv Levy would fly out from Chicago each weekend, and he'd open up his Wilson NFL briefcase. And he'd work on all the one-liners that he had done on the flight for the show. But he had a saying from Buffalo, which I think was always true, which was, if you listen to the fans, you're going to be sitting with the fans. And I think that was his point as a coach. And I think for us as an organization, we flipped that on its head a little bit. Like, fans truly, they identify your deepest insecurities at first. What they write about, what they talk about is what keeps you up at night. Now, the solutions sometimes are batshit crazy. I saw the guy who said we should trade, I think it was Kyron Williams and Brennan Jackson for Micah Parsons, right? Like, probably, not sure we want to trade either of our guys, but I'm not sure the Cowboys, if they're looking to trade Micah Parsons, don't want to do it for many draft picks. But I think that's ultimately, the engagement with fans. You love it because it keeps you going. And when you are fortunate enough to win and celebrate, you're celebrating with the city and a fan base that has been along with you for the whole ride.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, we lost Dean, which is the universal limit to tell us that our time is up. His camera died. So
Awesome.
Appreciate you coming on, man. Seriously, we cannot thank you enough.
Look, I appreciate the work you guys do, keeping our fans engaged with content, all of our content creators who love our team. It is an important part of our ecosystem. And, thank you from all the team. And hopefully we have a great year and we get to celebrate some truly good times this season.
We will. I can feel it. Take care, man.
I appreciate it, guys. Thank you. I appreciate it, guys.